esteemed inaugurator, eager organizers, learned fellow speakers, distinguished valedictory speaker, and my dear members of the audience. It gives me immense pleasure to be able to address this august gathering. As the keynote speaker, my responsibility is twofold. First of all, I must clarify certain very basic things for the audience. At the same time, regarding the webinar, I should also raise certain very pertinent questions that will be dwelt upon in greater detail by my fellow speakers. Now, the tentative title of my keynote speech is PanAcademic, Global Crisis and Local Response. Since the COVID-19 pandemic is impacting the academia the worldwide in different ways, the global crisis should get from us specific responses based on the region that we live in. Because our circumstances are different, our responses should also be different. Next slide. So by way of clarifying the basic points of the webinar, the conceptual domain of the webinar encompasses a paradigm shift occasioned by the global pandemic of COVID-19. So you must understand what a paradigm is. Now, a paradigm is a standard, a perspective, or a set of ideas about something that in its turn directs both thought and action. So, a paradigm shift occurs when our usual way of looking at something or thinking about that thing or even performing that thing is changed by the arrival of something new or different. That leads to a different way of both thought and action. For example, think about the assembly line. In the industrial age, the assembly line meant the entire process of production underwent a sea change. Let us think about the COVID-19. It is affecting the whole world, and it is, in a way, putting the entire humanity under house arrest. So obviously, it is leading to a paradigm shift. The way we look at ourselves, the way we look at the outside world, and the way we do our everyday work. All these things are changing. And that is why we are now engaging in this webinar. Instead of assembling somewhere, maybe in Kaliachok College, for a regular seminar. So that is the paradigm shift. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, if you look at the title of the webinar, one word will strike you. It is written over there that the quality teaching, learning is something that we are supposed to talk about. So you must understand what quality is. The quality is the standard or degree of excellence of something that is measured against some other thing of a similar kind. Quality may also mean doing the right things right. So it is uniquely judged by individuals, communities, organizations, states, and so on and so forth. Apparently, quality is judged against or by objective parameters. But ultimately, we see that quality is perceived, maintained, or improved on the basis of subjective and then therefore obviously ideological considerations. Because whose quality? Something may have a good quality for me, at the same time it may not appeal to you of being of sufficiently good quality. So when we talk about quality teaching and learning, let's move to the next slide, please. When we talk about the quality teaching and learning, we have to understand that this quality teaching and learning is perceived, measured, maintained or improved on the basis of ideological considerations of the high and the mighty in most cases. So you see, quality teaching and learning ultimately boils down to quality education. Because quality education, or for that matter, education, encompasses teaching, learning, evaluation, and its ilk. You know, the teacher, the learner, and the evaluation system, all these things come under the purview of education. So obviously, quality teaching learning can mean quality education. And quality education always sings the tune of the hegemonic classes, those who are in power. We can very easily think about the way, in the name of quality, certain subjects are highlighted, whereas certain other subjects are at the same time put to the back burner, so to say. Now, when we talk about quality education in the time of crisis, it has its opportunities just as it has its challenges. Because the question of the virtual and the classroom teaching need to be taken into consideration not as two things contradictory, but as two things complementary. Next slide, please. Well, we see COVID-19 and quality education has got certain very basic points to consider. There are certain dangers. We all know that with the shift from real life face-to-face classroom teaching to online classroom teaching, overhead expenditures are coming down, and states can take this opportunity to give a free hand to private business, private institutions, and a shift may occur from accountability and responsibility to cupidity on the one hand and opportunism on the other. At the same time, we have to understand that while the states and other institutions are talking about quality education, we have to deal with inadequate funding of education in most of the countries of this world. We know how, according to the IMD survey, India has fallen behind in the worldwide competitive index because of its very pitiful expenditure in the budget outlay for the education sector. The pros and cons should also be thought about. When we talk about COVID-19 and so-called quality education, we have to grapple with the context of, on the one hand, accessibility, and on the other hand, inaccessibility. Whereas in the global north, many institutions have gone totally online. We can talk about the Cambridge, the Oxford, and so on and so forth, the Harvard. At the same time, in rural areas of the global south, there are certain issues that often get ignored. There is, for example, the question of connectivity. There is the question of location. In the rural areas, connectivity is a big problem. Similarly, access or lack of access to smart devices have meant that even when we talk about online classes, a large section of our students, especially in the third world, especially in the global south, are unable to access those classes. So basically, again, the hiatus between the knowledge haves and the knowledge have-nots are widening. And the question of Foucault regarding the knowledge power nexus cannot be ignored altogether. Similarly, you think about the inadequate domestic space. Very recently, one of my esteemed colleagues from Sambalpur University, Professor Ashok Mohapatra, was talking about these online classes or working from home. How adequate space had to be managed in order to conceal our poverty or lack of preparedness. Ungainly objects have to be put away. Even biological noises and our voice should have to be lowered in order to fit the bill. Okay. Similarly, the cost component should also be talked about, because as many of my students often complain, the price of data, internet data, is not very cheap. And the private companies, the service providers, are taking advantage of our dependence on the internet nowadays. Okay, we can also talk about what to teach, because in this discussion of the pandemic and the educational response that we should give to this crisis, we are often bothered about the way we can reach out to our students. We are not sufficiently bothered about what we should teach our students, how we should change the priority from progress to preservation. from greed to need, from arrogance to abidance, or from division to unity, often do not get the deserving discussion excuse me, that should be given there. Similarly, we have to understand that the world is enough for our needs, but the world's resources are not enough for our greed. And that is what this pandemic and such other global crises are actually showing us point blank. Okay, next slide, please. You see, in the subtitle portion of my presentation, I was talking about the global crisis and the local response. Why? Because, you know, this is a diverse world. As a result, the circumstances are different. Our economic circumstances, our technical infrastructure, all these things are not homogeneous or same or similar. As a result, our responses should also be different. Now, we all know that this pandemic has given an opportunity to social Darwinism on the one hand and capitalism on the other to mingle their might and change the agenda from welfare to, in a jocular vein, we can say farewell. Because they are trying to keep higher education for the creamy layer. The global north and the global south, they have their own realities. So obviously their responses should also be different. Okay. When we talk about our different responses, we have to understand the need for a more equitable world order and also the need for socio-cultural inclusivity. Because only then can we effectively ward off the muscle flexing of the WASP, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant in America. We can also mitigate the marginalization of the BIM in the United Kingdom, black and minority ethnic. Similarly, when we look at India, we have to think about the way the LGBTQ, the Dalits, the minorities, women, and the disabled are always marginalized by the powers that be, in most cases. So, we have to understand that talking about the academic response to the COVID-19 should be serious. And let's move to the next slide. You know, we have two options: to talk the talk and to walk the walk. There is an element of cynicism that often creeps in because there is an element of litany and hypocrisy in all discussions about the pandemic that we are witnessing in the social media, in the seminar circles or the webinar circles also. But you know, for this webinar at least, there is hope. Because Professor Najibur Rahman's team has chosen the speakers with minute care. Think about it. It has been inaugurated by Professor Chaudhary. a man from physics. Obviously, the welcome address was delivered by someone from English literature background. I, with my training in language and literature, also come in the same category. Then there is Dr. Mohammadi with her background in linguistics, Professor Hannan from law, Professor Mondol from HRD and population sciences, Mr. Raihan from the discipline of history, very importantly, and obviously my own teacher and the distinguished valedictory speaker, Professor Dev Kumar Mukherjee, who comes from the world of economics. Similarly, Najib Bhai's team has also assembled people from different places, from Iran, from India, from Bangladesh, and importantly, someone who is now researching in a famous university of the UK, but who is the son of the soil. So unique perspectives and unique insights from diverse disciplines can really help us evolve a more mature intellectual discourse, because we have to fight against the callousness of man, his arrogance and foolishness that now threatens the extinction of the whole human race. We know that our esteemed fellow speakers will have to chart their own territories. For example, we may think about the language practices, the linguistic features, and also here we must go to the next slide. Also the possible survival or extinction of endangered languages because of our increased use of and dependence on certain major languages like English, Chinese, Spanish, and so on and so forth, because of this crisis situation. We are all cooped up at home, and we are being bombarded by the language content of these major languages, and that threatens to take away our common heritage of certain endangered languages. Okay. Professor Hannan may also think about, let's go to the next slide, the response of the legal fraternity. You know, the COVID-19 pandemic has raised certain very pertinent questions about human rights and the rule of law. So obviously, the legal fraternity has to play a very big role here and keep a balance between a proactive judiciary on the one hand and a blind justice on the other. The need to enact laws to deal with the pandemic situation, but at the same time, to implement the law, all these things need to be discussed from the perspective of a lawyer or a professor of law. Similarly, let's go to the next slide. We can talk about the HRD, human resource development and population science, that will be taken up for discussion by Professor Mondol. You see how COVID-19 has exposed the limitations of our human resources to deal with a very dangerous situation. And the lack of technical infrastructure is also something that needs to be taken into consideration. So, human resource development should concentrate on meting out empowerment and also laying the groundwork for preparing us to meet any eventuality, not only this time, but also in future. Okay. So far as history is concerned, sometimes we have to understand that this pandemic is not unique. There have been other pandemics in history, and there were certain bits of similarity and there were certain counts of dissimilarity. So the lessons learned and unlearned from other pandemics should also help us, not only in reading history, but also in making history in our own ways. Now, we cannot forget the role of science in this COVID-19 situation. Science is now being vilified in different quarters because science has, in some cases, put progress before preservation. So, change circumstances should mean changes in our perspectives and priorities. As a result, our mission should change based on our vision of a sustainable development and a more respectable and respectful coexistence between Mother Nature and the erring, arrogant human beings. So obviously, science should think not only about progress, but also about preservation and protection. Okay. So we'll have to talk about how economics should respond to this situation. The need to adopt, let us go to the next slide, please. The need to adopt specific policies and diverse economic models should be thought about, because employment generation and economic diversification should both be taken up at war footing. Now, what role should literature, teaching literature and teachers of literature play in setting the intellectual reader right? That should also be talked about. A realignment of educational goals and means should take place. We have often been bullied by people from other disciplines about the role and the utility of literature. The ethical turn is now very, very important, because again, in order to live in harmony with nature, in order to evade extinction, we have to be more ethical and at the same time more practical minded in our response to and use of nature. And here the link can be provided by literature, because literature can show us how to move forward, imbibing lessons and imbibing values. The value education can be provided by literature. And here, humanities can supplement the efforts of science in order to ensure a brighter and safer future for mankind. So we have to look at the way ahead. You know, let's go to the next, please. Next slide, please. You know, Maxim Gorky, another writer, had once said, this was actually a response from one Russian musik or a farmer to him. Gorky recounts how the farmer said, we are taught to fly in the air like birds or to swim in the water like the fishes. But how to live on the earth, we don't know. It is our duty as teachers to make humanity understand how to live on this earth. Because as Jawaharlal Nehru had once said, the only alternative to coexistence is co-destruction. If we cannot coexist in harmony with other species, with Mother Nature, we have to go extinct, like the dinosaurs. Now, similarly, American economist Milton Friedman had once said that only a crisis, actual or perceived, can cause real change. I'm paraphrasing. And when a crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas lying around. Now, what are the ideas lying around? Are they good? Are they beneficial for human existence? If they are, we have to promote as teachers. If they are not, then obviously we will have to generate new ideas, disseminate new ideas, because we cannot be cynical. As teachers, as purveyors of knowledge, as torch bearers, we have to agree with William Faulkner, who had in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech said, I believe that man will not merely endure, he will prevail. I hope I have been able to give you at least some food for thought. Thanks for bearing with me for so long, and I wish you better luck with the other speakers. Thank you and namaskar.